Hello and welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I am Dan McCaleb, Executive Editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Pennsylvania editor Kristen Smith is taking the day off today, so I am joining the Center Square Pennsylvania reporter Anthony Hennon. Kristen will return next week, so I have the honor of filling her shoes today. A tough task, but thankfully I do have Anthony here to give me insight on what he's been reporting on at thecentersquare.com. Anthony, one of the stories you wrote this week has to do with the Braddock Locks and Dam outside of Pittsburgh, an expansion project there that's been sort of crippled by delays. What's happening here?
Yeah, so as I've learned in reporting this story, no hydroelectric project is simple or quick. These consistently tend to have long delays and issues, but this project essentially would add in 7 turbine generators at the already existing Braddock Locks and Dam. And so the idea of this is add that on. The dam's already built, so this could be a smaller project, but still produce more than 5 megawatts of energy. The problem here is that this was sort of got on paper about 2011, 2012, and it's still looking at this point, maybe by the end of 2024, this project will actually get completed. This has been an issue of a redundant permitting process, delays that drag that out, the usual long process of doing environmental assessments, community meetings, all sorts of different plans and things need to be submitted to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to get greenlit by local, state, and regional or federal officials. This project also requires clearance from the Army Corps of Engineers. So there's a lot going into this. But two things that kind of stand out, even aside from these usual hurdles and delays you expect, there's issues with transmission and getting plugged into the overall electric grid. So what this essentially has added up to, when I spoke with the leader of the project, which is Hydro Green Energy, their president and CEO, Wayne Krause, said that the last cost estimate they did was in 2019, so pre-COVID, pre-inflation, and their cost was up about 25 to 30% at that point. And the final cost, they're not even bothering doing another estimate on this until they're near the finish line, simply because you can't get any reliable numbers until you're about a month or two out from the kind of final construction and process here.
Just a quick question on this. Are taxpayers or ratepayers on the hook for these increased costs, essentially?
A little bit to a certain extent. The Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority has provided I believe it's about a $500,000 grant to help with this process. I believe they issued that in 2019, and it's an annual renewal process that PEDA has to do every year. So there's some taxpayer money in this, but I think the broader issue here is it brings out just how much taxpayer money costs in all these sorts of energy projects, because you have to get clearance to connect into PJM's grid, which is the electric grid that covers Pennsylvania and a dozen other states. And the problem with that is essentially there's a capacity issue and trying to get these projects online. There's been some reforms at PJM, because previously, and the process that this hydroelectric dam has gone through is essentially a first come, first serve process when you're applying for getting interconnected to the grid to add this power in, broadly speaking. Essentially, you would submit your project proposal, and then PJM would get to it in the order that you submitted it. That's created a long backlog and a kind of a logjam here, because what would happen is, since you would only get evaluated in the order that you submitted it, a lot of companies will put in 3, 5, a dozen projects at the same time, even though they know only maybe 2 or 3 of those would actually come to fruition. The point there was to get your project in the pipeline. So going in the future, they've passed a reform plan that would do a ready to go process, which basically the projects that have their funding set, that are more liable to get done quicker, those kind of get to the front of the line to get evaluated.
Natural gas production in the state of Pennsylvania being slowed down in part by permitting processes in the state. Now that we're talking about this dam project, which is also having slowdowns because of, in part, permitting processes, it seems like maybe Pennsylvania needs to work on its licensing.
I would argue, this is a Pennsylvania issue, but this is also a federal issue. This is an issue many other states have. Even aside from getting connected to the grid is a problem of building new transmission lines. And that gets really complicated because, again, you have local, state, and federal officials getting involved and needing to give the green light here, because you need to get rights of way to build these lines. You need to find the labor to build these lines. And this just gets very, very complicated because there's so many different levels you have to go through. And it's also, this is just a complex thing, whether it's a hydroelectric plant, whether it's more natural gas. What I was hearing from Hydro Green Energy, their president said, I don't see how you interconnect to a large interconnected system serving tens, if not 100 million people across a very, very large geographic area, and do it in a way to make sure you're going to keep reliability and safety where it is without doing these kinds of studies and taking the time to do it right. So, I'm sure in this process, there's some things that it's duplicative. It's not necessarily something we need to keep. But at the same time, this is I think people really underestimate how complex and complicated these energy projects are and our energy needs in Pennsylvania and across the nation. And so, there's issues, as PJM itself has realized, that, the permitting process, the way that they review applications, there's a lot we can do to improve that. But at the same time, there's no silver bullet here. And I think unless we have a very strong push, like we did with the collapse of the bridge on Interstate 95 in Philadelphia, or when the Fern Hollow Bridge in Pittsburgh collapsed, unless we have some very stark a crisis situation when you can hurdle through a lot of this stuff in weeks rather than months or years, that seems to be the only time we really get a lot of movement on this. When that doesn't happen, we're stuck with these years-long delays and this very complicated duplicating process.
Government regulations at their finest. Thank you for your insight onto this story, Anthony. Listeners can keep up with it at thecentersquare.com. But we are now out of time. For Anthony Hennon, I'm Dan McCaleb. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe.